In the field of world policy, I would dedicate this nation to the policy of the good neighbor, the neighbor who resolutely respects himself and, because he does so, respects the rights of others. Hello again.
Well, good hello.
And welcome to the series. I'm your host, and today we're looking at 1942/1943's fantastic little film, Saludos, Amigos. This script was written by Sarah.
I do, however, have a head. It's attached to my body, it is me.
So thank you, Sarah.
It'll still be me.
If you're new here, welcome for the first time of, I hope, many. And if you're returning, I thank you once again for your continued patronage. Now, sit back, relax, and let's get into this together. I had this on VHS as a kid. That should tell you all you need to know about my personal nostalgia glasses for the film, and its sibling, The Three Caballeros. Saludos Amigos and its quasi-sequel, The Three Caballeros, were, as the first two films of the package era, commissioned as a part of a deal with the US government to improve relations with Latin America. The State Department, mainly Nelson Rockefeller, commissioned Disney to create films designed to reach out to Latin American audiences and ingratiate them to Americans, as well as educate the American public back home just a little bit. This was all part of a grander design, what became known as President Franklin Roosevelt's good neighbor policy, in regards to his strategy toward the United States' relationship with South American governments.
Hello?
I'm Haywood with Food and Friends. Grocery store, how are you today, sir?
Governments that had worryingly close ties to a certain angry Austrian despot.
Heil, honey.
Heil, honey.
Heil, honey.
Heil, honey.
Heil, honey.
Hello.
I'm home.
These films were offered to audiences much like one might offer an egg to a friend in a particularly trying time.
Can I offer you a nice egg in this trying time?
Yeah, he's got an egg!
Anyway, this was being done in an effort by the US government to counteract close ties some Latin American governments had with Nazi Germany. Obviously. Walt took 18 artists, musicians, and writers to Latin America to learn about the different cultures represented in this film. Their trip included the Andes, which I've written in the script as the Andres, but anyway, they didn't visit the Andres. Maybe they did. Maybe there were some Andres down there in Latin America. Their trip included the Andes, Chile, Buenos Aires, and Rio de Janeiro. The end credits include a note from Walt. With sincere appreciation for the courtesy and cooperation shown us by the artists, musicians, and our many friends in Latin America. This plan was phenomenally successful. Film historian Alfred Charles Richard Jr. commenting that Saludos Amigos did more to cement a community of interest between peoples of the Americas in a few months than the State Department had in the last 50 years. Well, okay then. I don't know about all that, but it was certainly quite the hit for Disney just when he needed one, and his third financially successful theatrical release in a row. The exact budget for the film seems difficult to parse, as it's made up of 4 separate shorts produced for some time on their own with separate budgets, and not knowing the actual cost of the research trip through Latin America. However, the film ended up earning over $1.1 million in its theatrical run. Given that even the incredibly visually lush Bambi of the previous year had cost only $850,000 to produce, and the 20 minutes longer Dumbo from the year before that had also come in at under $1 million to make. I cannot imagine that the uniquely short Saludos Amigos cost anywhere near as much to make as the eventual $1.1 million that it earned back for Disney. Finally, Walt was back on track with an active string now of 3 hits at the box office in a row. This film is partially a mini-documentary about Disney Animation's Goodwill Tour, and then mostly told through 4 animated shorts, which makes it quite a unique-feeling little film among the Disney animated classics. Notice the word little there. This is by far the shortest production in the animated canon, coming in at a wonderfully brisk 42 minutes.
This movie's 133 minutes.
The entire point of this era of Disney animation was to weather and survive the financial devastation of World War II, and the research trip for this film in particular was planned partially in an effort for Walt to build back trust and goodwill between himself and some of his top artists in the middle of the brutal and horrifically badly handled by Walt animation strike of 1941. A few words on the animation department strike of 1941. By the early 1940s, the Disney company had expanded to well over 1,000 employees. However, they were far from the only animation studio in town, and by 1941, they had become the only animation studio left standing that had failed to unionize their workers with an outside independent union. In addition to this exploitative state of affairs, Disney's animation studio had also become riddled with increasingly convoluted and nonsensical hierarchies and payment plans. Animators recalled that you might be sitting down drawing all day every day, making $20 a week, and the guy sitting next to you might be doing the exact same thing, but making $40 a week instead, or up to $300. Who knew? Who knows? Only Walt.
Well, I guess it's just a mystery.
By 1941, the confusion, stupidity, and volatility of the Disney company's internal structure had reached critical mass, and the hand of the animators had been forced. Art Babbitt, the man who developed Goofy, as well as animating countless other characters and stories, was one of the more senior and higher-paid animators working under Walt by 1941. However, despite having a comparatively cushy and high-up position in the company, Babbitt was one of the most vocal critics of Walt and his business practices. Animators were not only paid vastly differently and seemingly at random rates, obviously mostly due to favoritism, but there were also many perks only afforded to the higher-ups at Disney or to Walt's favorites, such as parking spaces, access to the gym, the steam room, the restaurants, and various other amenities. The different departments at Disney were also strictly policed in terms of who had access to what building and when, always in ways that seemed to make it harder for the artists to actually do their job. Babbitt saw this inequality as unsustainable, and so he and many others petitioned Walt for the right to unionize. Disney refused, giving a speech to his workers that seemed to condescend rather than to understand, saying, "In the 20 years I've spent in this business, I've weathered many storms. It's been far from easy sailing. It required a great deal of work, struggle, determination, competence, faith, and above all, unselfishness. Some people think we have a class distinction in the place. They wonder why some people get better seats in the theater than others. They wonder why some men get spaces in the parking lot and others don't. I have always felt that, and always will feel, that the men that contribute most to the organization should, out of respect alone, enjoy some privileges. My first recommendation to the lot of you is this: put your own house in order. You can't accomplish a damn thing by sitting around and waiting to be told everything. If you're not progressing as you should, instead of grumbling and growling, do something about it."
Are you employed, sir?
Employed?
This refusal to budge, essentially Walt Disney throwing his hands up and saying, "I know you are, but what am I?"
I know you are, but what am I? 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 Infinity!
Prompted Art Babbitt and over 200 other Disney employees, mainly the animators and some writers, to immediately go on strike. This, and many other layoffs, cut down the Disney staff from well over 1,000 to only 694, right in the middle of the production for Dumbo. The animators picketed right outside the new Disney studio in Burbank, with Walt getting so angry at the sight of the animators, as well as what he saw as a personal betrayal from Babbitt, that he actually attempted to punch Babbitt out, before being stopped by the security guards at Disney. The strikers, for their part, maintained a jovial sort of block party attitude during the affair, drawing colorful and hilarious signs and parading around an effigy of Walt that they then ritually beheaded using a mini guillotine. Based animation strike of 1941. As the strike raged on, Walt scrambled to finish Dumbo and continue on the initial production of Bambi, as well as to fulfill the promise he had now made to the U.S. State Department. A bunch of other unions in the U.S. also became part of this and were in solidarity with the animator strike. So this was a really big deal. This reached a lot of other industries and businesses and stuff, and this was big news at the time. Headline news. Disney had planned the aforementioned research trip to South America, and he was determined to go on the trip before signing anything with the union. both as a delaying tactic and also to avoid having to bring along on the trip anyone that he had deemed as a traitor. The Labor Relations Board had already gotten Disney to verbally agree to sign something eventually by the time he and the other employees left. But he was putting it off as long as possible, both as a negotiation tactic and because Walt was absolutely furious about the strike and anybody involved in it. Enter William Pomerantz, the second Chad of today after Art Babbitt. To keep the pressure up while Disney was on the trip, Bill Pomerantz, who was the union's business agent at the time, obtained details of union leaders in the cities that were on Disney's itinerary in South America via the National Maritime Union. He then contacted the State Department to inform them that many more new pickets of Disney and his films were being organized in South America, all across, arguing that the Disney company should comply with American standards of fair treatment of labor, as a condition of Walt Disney being allowed to represent the United States as a goodwill ambassador. This gambit of Pomerantz's paid off brilliantly and forced the U.S. Conciliation Service to bring both sides together in talks in Washington, D.C. Basically, this meant that Disney entered these negotiation talks forced to be there and with absolutely zero leverages. Faced William Pomerantz. Finally, an agreement was made and signed, which included the reinstatement of employees fired before the strike, equalization of pay, a clearer salary structure, and a grievance procedure. Prior to the Disney Animators' strike of 1941, Disney had maintained a house union, which is basically an in-company union designed to give the appearance of the workers actually having rights. Essentially, a glorified HR department.
Computer says nah.
However, after the great triumph of 1941, Disney Animation was able to start to get itself back on track, just in time for their second era. Disney himself never forgave the participants of the strike, and thereafter treated union members with contempt, arguing in a letter that the strike cleaned house at our studio, and got rid of the chip-on-the-shoulder boys and the world owes me a living lads. And yet, he was all still mean to the people who returned. He's like, they got rid of all the bad people. I'm still gonna be a shit to everybody who came back. Dickhead Walt strikes again. Walt is a bad boss, part 6.
If I had to do it all over again and had to take bids all over again, I would still do it all over again. I would do it all over again. I'd do it 15 times over again.
In the end, however, many artists never returned after the strike, instead going to work for competing animation studios like Warner Brothers, Fleischer Brothers, and Schlesinger. I may eventually make an entire video about the animators' strike one day with even more detail, but enough about it for now. It's already taken up almost half of the video. And let's get back to the package film era. To borrow a phrase from Lindsay Ellis, now we know how we got here. Let's take a look at what we got. Until Walt could go back to making his high standards, gorgeously animated, experimental attempts at art house animation masterpieces, he had to spend a few years making some cheap and fast-to-hit theaters surefire hits, as well as build back trust with his top artists. To do this, he pivoted to producing these package films, collections of shorts that take a bit of a cue from Fantasia, being collections of 2 or more short stories that could all be produced simultaneously by smaller teams of artists, thereby churning out much cheaper and faster work. This also allowed the Disney animators the freedom to inject more fun back into their work, something that some of them had felt that certain entries in the Golden or Tar and Sugar era had lacked. This looser, goofier, and more playful style of animation and humor percolated and formed over the course of the rest of the 1940s, eventually carrying forward and injecting the next era of Disney, the films from 1950 to 1967, with a particular brand of silliness and pure, chaotic, throwback package era fun. This film is the beginning of the period in which Disney Animation under Walt found their true and lasting identity for their final era with the old man. While that is still several weeks away for us now, we will start to see hints of it here and there throughout every subsequent film of the decade. While the Golden Era, the 5 films spanning 1937 to 1942, had been a wild, insane, bizarre, wonderful, madcap, experimental roller coaster ride for Walt and his animation team, it was in the past now, and they could never return. It's 1943, the world is on fire, and we need to make some money, as well as make some friends with some governments who are friends with some Nazis. Saludos Amigos once again got Disney nominated for Best Score at the Oscars, as well as also being up for Best Original Song for the title track. Both music nominations rapidly becoming a routine event for the young studio. The countries we visit are, in order, Peru, with Donald Duck, Chile, with Pedro the anthropomorphic child plane, Argentina, with Gaucho Goofy, and finally Brazil, with Donald once again, this time meeting Jose Carioca, the stylish, cigar-smoking, charming-as-all get-out green parrot. Short 1 features Donald Duck interacting with regular villagers, and eventually a llama. Donald is always great, and this short set in Peru is one of my favorite Donald appearances, a great example of using this character. This is the first Disney film to portray a cartoon llama on screen, predating The Emperor's New Groove by several decades. The bit with the llama bridge is marvelous physical comedy and feels perfectly classic for Donald Duck, getting himself slowly but surely into a ridiculous and frustrating situation and being quite put upon the entire time. It's also interesting that The Emperor's New Groove also features a crumbly bridge being walked over by a llama. Perhaps the same bridge? Either way, this is a hilarious start to our adventure, and the flute music provided by the little boy is memorable and quite lovely. Of course, as a flute player myself, I'm a sucker for flute. It's truly fantastic how easy it is for Donald Duck to lose his temper. One of my favorite ever frustrated comedy characters, the precursor of many yet to come. Short 2 is about Pedro, a little boy plane from Chile, who lives at an airstrip with his mom and dad planes. One day, the father plane is sick, and so Pedro gets to deliver the mail by himself for the first time. Pedro the plane is very cute, and the line, "Another martyr to the mail system," is marvelously funny. Pedro's quest to deliver the mail is a fun little narrative that perfectly fills up its 10 minutes of screen time, and Pedro himself is a winning lead, much better than Little Toot, the obnoxious juvenile tugboat from Melody Time that we will meet in just a couple of weeks' time. Aconcagua is an intimidating villain, visually, a forgotten antagonist in the Disney canon who does more with an angry, motionless look than Hans can do in an entire 90-minute film. Aconcagua gives me Walmart brand Chernobog vibes, in the best way possible. This third segment takes us to Argentina, to visit an American cowboy, cast brilliantly with Goofy himself, who has been supplanted into the similar role of an Argentinian gaucho. This is the only film in the animated canon to feature Walt himself live action on screen. He's in the documentary preface to this third short, and he is, of course, smoking, as he did constantly 24 hours a day in real life. Gaucho Goofy is adorable, and Goofy in general was at his peak in the 1940s and 50s, his second peak coming of course in the 90s with the two Goofy movies. This film as a whole, and the rest of Goofy's shorts adventures in this period, were narrated by Fred Shields, who you may remember as the voice of Bambi's father, the great prince of the forest, from last week's film. Shields had incredible comedic timing, and he paired up perfectly with the character of Goofy to become basically his foil as the all-seeing, all-knowing, often a bit cheeky narrator for Goofy to bounce off of and react to. Shields does a fantastic job narrating this movie as a whole, almost becoming the de facto lead of the film, as he is the single voice we hear the most over the course of the entire thing. There is amazing slapstick here with Goofy and the ostrich, and Goofy dancing with his horse is beyond classic. The music is also just so fun and lively, and the animation of the dancing is rubbery to perfection. The scene where Goofy is seen smoking a cigarette and blowing smoke rings was removed from the 2000 DVD release, which is hilarious given the smoking Walter that appears immediately before it. This fourth and final short is the first appearance of the iconic Jose Carioca, a super underrated Disney character. For our last location, we visit Brazil, and first of all, the samba music in this is incredible. Donald Duck and Jose Carioca are a pair of characters that appear in 3 different package era films together, and they're a classic Disney pairing. Their personalities are perfectly complementary, Donald hot-tempered and impulsive, while Jose is cool, collected, and suave. Their contrasting green and blue color schemes are also gorgeous together. Donald's fire breath lighting Jose's cigar is one of my favorite things ever. I aspire to be like Jose Carioca. Now it's time for the Critics Roundup, which is a segment I put at the end of these videos where I look at, today, it's 23 different critics' rankings of all of the Disney classics from YouTube and online, and then I basically tell you where I rank them, I read you a few words, and then I will tell you what the average ranking of it at the end and give you some context. So, anyway, timestamp on the screen now for those who want to skip. Shafrillis Productions, 36th, calls it a commodification and barely a film, but it's still enjoyable and he likes all the shorts individually. Sean Chandler, 60th, calls it not really a movie, calls the shorts forgettable, calls it weird that it's in the Disney canon. Brian Hull, 54th, says it fails at being both a documentary and a cartoon. Harsh. Ooh. The Trove, 37th, says it doesn't fit in the canon, dislikes the live action, likes Pedro and the animation. Dave Lee Down Under, 57th, calls it just propaganda. Things can be propaganda and good. Modern Mouse, 38th, says it is important but isn't as good as the Three Caballeros. The 90s Kid, 49th to 54th. Justin watches movies. 39th to 50th, says he likes the first 2 package films a little better than the following 4. The Glad in Gladiator, 56th. Chris Itua, 58th, says it's quite lackluster even by package film era standards. Maple Street Movies, 54th, says it isn't very good. The Movie Geek, 52nd, says he wouldn't recommend it to literally anyone. Maybe the harshest of all, okay. And that wasn't even the lowest on his list. Alright, now that was the YouTube, now the online critics. Collider, 54th, calls it more fascinating than lovable. Paste Magazine, 58th, says it's the slightest package film, but it's still a lot of fun. Slash Film, 38th, enjoys it but criticizes the length.
That's what she said!
Hollywood.com, 43rd, says it has laughs, but that your mind will stray. My SF Reviews, 37th. Cinema Blend, 43rd, says that it's more coherent than most of the other package films. The Playlist, 39th, calls it slight but fascinating for the story behind it. Unshaved Mouse, 46th, says, what a weird little movie. Not bad, don't get me wrong. I mean, I liked it. Screen Rant, 58th, calls it a fun classic but now very dated. Noah Fryman, 38th, says it shows off the beauty of South America. Darth Docking on Reddit, 47th. 23 reviews, highest ranking at 36th, so yeah, highest of 36th, which was the first one actually, which was Shafrillis Productions. And 0 reviewers ranked it in the even top half. It failed to crack anybody's top 30, top 35, basically. Nobody ranked it in the top half of their list. Saludos Amigos got an average ranking of 47.8th, or just under 48th. This puts it 6th out of the 6 so far that we have looked at in terms of average rankings of the Disney classics. So far, it is Snow White, Pinocchio, Bambi, Fantasia, Dumbo, and then Saludos Amigos, and there's a big gap, as you can see, between 5 and 6.
Después quizá mordiendo un llanto, quédate siempre me dijiste.
Some people may balk at how relatively highly I'm going to rate this film. I admit that it is a childhood favorite, and that fact alone may color this review somewhat, but I have to say it really holds up well. This is some of the best early work from the animators who would go on to shape Disney for basically the next 40 years. The package film era may be regarded as the weakest period in Disney's long history, but its debut feature is a breezy, light, easily digested, incredibly fun and silly set of 4 shorts, woven together by the expert narration of Fred Shields. The thing that makes this film work is that while there is no narrative to this film, unlike The Three Caballeros, these 4 shorts tie together beautifully as a love letter to the continent of South America. It's hilarious and adorable, and most of all, different. I must note especially that it is always fun to see classic characters like Donald and Goofy take center stage and remind us why they have always been so beloved and funny. This film has got absolutely enchanting music from each country it visits. It's got colorful and ridiculous visual gags, and it's got a couple of truly charming little stories. It's got an energy to it that is almost impossible not to enjoy, although it seems like many achieved that feat of the ones who reviewed it. And it doesn't even get close to overstaying its welcome for me. I adore this silly little film in all its eccentric splendor. The first and one of the strongest in the package film era, Saludos Amigos really does feel like a familiar greeting from an old friend. A friend who might just be, with any luck, offering a comforting egg.
Can I offer you a nice egg in this trying time? Yeah, he's got an egg!
With all that said, 6 out of 10.
Well, you don't need to, because I already gave it 5 plus 2, which moved over to your side, so it's already...
It hasn't moved, and now we have 5.
It's already covered.
If it moves, and then it has 7. Just best rating it's ever been. It's the best movie of the year.
Which it is.
And that's it. Next week, we'll be back and looking at 1944's The Three Caballeros, the first kind of sequel in Disney animation history. So please do join me for that as well. Thank you again for watching, and if you're still here, good night, good luck, and enjoy the afterword.
El amor. Noche, noche, tú eres una flor. En tu noche de amor canta un trovador. Consentida, negra de mi vida, ¿quién te quiere a ti? Mira, mi alma dolorida, negra de mi vida, y solo por ti. Negra, negra consentida, negra de mi vida, deja de llorar. Que mi pecho amante está rebosante de felicidad.
That's all.